With all the twists and turns that happened this season, the injustice meted out to angel dust, which still hurts me to think about and which I'm not going to cover on the channel because Vera over at Council of Geeks already conveyed everything that's bothered me about how Angel's story was told this season, and the quasi resolution we got to the imminent war between heaven and hell, part of what has had me kicking my feet in glee since I saw the last two episodes, was getting to see the theory my best friend and I had about how Alastor was going to get out of his deal be confirmed and play out in episode 8. I also, however, stumbled on murmurings where certain Hazbin fans basically finished watching the season with the firm opinion that Vox and Alastor are basically the same. A take that I can understand why they have it. After all, we see through the season that they were both murderers in their human lives, both sought help from others to consolidate their power, both used manipulation to get what they wanted from others. Both are fond of touching others as a form of exerting dominance in their interaction with them. And they both died through neglectful means that, if we do have a dark sense of humor, you might consider just a tad bit funny. I mean, when I list their similarities that way, it is pretty easy to come to the conclusion that they are basically the same. However, I will say that even though there are similarities, there is a core difference to Alastor and Vox that talk of their similarities seem to be ignoring, and I would like to talk about that. Because yes, both Alistair and Vox were murderers in their human lives. However, there is the need to remember the reason why they each resorted to murder. Vox was doing so in order to make inroads in his career as a way to clear the path for himself as he climbed up the proverbial ladder, taking out every single competition, everyone who had at some point or the other helped him to get there, so he can stand at the pinnacle of it all, not beholden to anyone, with sheer power in his solitary hands. He was the stereotypical powerful white man with blood-stained hands until a television screen dropped on his head, killing him on the spot and putting an end to his rampage on Earth. Of course, that meant he got to continue his rampage in hell, but at least humanity was spared of his continued bloodbath for the moment. Alastor, on the other hand, we are meant to infer, whilst also a murderer, chose his victims based off of what he read as disrespect to him. We see this in the scene with the man who spilled a drink on him and didn't bother to apologize, but instead seemed to be laughing in his face at the slight, as most white men in that era would do to a black man that they considered other. Which is why the scene then transitioned to the same man, terrified for his life as Alastor turned into the Grim Reaper, there to have it said life. Now, before I go on, a quick thank you to my lovely patrons and YouTube members whose support have been instrumental in helping me continue to make content, especially since I've been doing this full time since the start of the year when I've been out of paid employment. And a special shout out to Lena and Holly for their extra support. You get all the hearts and kisses too. If you would like to support me on Patreon or become a YouTube member to enjoy certain perks, even get a shout out, the link to do so is in the description bar. So back to what I was saying, I know the instinctual reaction to everything I've said so far is probably cool motive, still murder, in which case you would be right. However, the motive is extremely important when it gives us an insight into the psychology of the characters in question and their motivations. Because with Vox, we see that he's always been driven by envy, desirous of what he doesn't have that others possess instead. And thus, every action he took whilst he was alive, which led to him murdering so many of his colleagues, associates, and even his boss, was driven by that desire and hunger, and he continues to replicate that whilst in hell. Alistair's motive, meanwhile, is based off of the murders he committed, is about being the one with power over others, power that he gets to wield as he wishes. In the case of the murder we see him execute whilst a human, it is the power to demand the respect that isn't accorded him by virtue of the fact that he is a mixed race man, living in the 1930s, trying to build a life for himself as the voice to listen to on radio. The fact that Alastor, even as a mixed race man at the height of segregation, is able to successfully carve such a successful career for himself without needing to take out his competition because he is that good and talented speaks to yet another disparity between him and Vox, and the hint of disdain when he points out how Vox needs others in order to get him to the position he wants to be. Whether the others are partners or bodies that Vox has to step on to get to the top is another point entirely. Plus, Vox himself does end up confirming what we all already knew, that he saw himself as God, solo, solitary, without a desire to share that spotlight with anyone else, which has always been consistent with him since he was a human, and he was quite willing to kill in order to get to that point. Alastor, on the other hand, did not need to do the same. Plus, we can even consider that if Vivzi is still holding on to the reference she'd kept in mind when creating Alastor, which is her comparing him to Dexter, another serial killer with a weird moral code, then we can say that some of Alastor's victims might be guilty of other infractions that, if we follow the Dexter crumbs, might mean that Alastor did unwittingly do the world some good by taking them out of the picture. The same cannot be said for Vox's own victims, whose death only benefited Vox. Then there's the bit with both Vox and Alastor needing others to consolidate their powers. But the thing to consider, however, is how both characters went about acquiring said power, as it does say a lot about their motives and potential end goal as well. With Alastor, it was through a summoning where he admits to Rosie that he knows what is waiting for someone like him in hell and is unwilling to submit himself to be another person's pawn. What he wants instead is the power that he can wield against others so he can continue to have his fun, which is aligned to what we can interpret from his character. That Alastor, based off of the life he's lived, wants to retain control over his life even after his death, since that is what had driven him whilst he was alive, especially considering the lack of power that was inherently tied to his experience as a mixed race man. And whilst he made the request for power, he also negotiated somewhat clearer terms on what Rosie would be getting as her part of the deal for granting him the power he sought. A deal with a clear expiration date, and that is less likely to be abused considering the clearly stated terms. It's a quid pro quo arrangement that works for both of them. Compare that to Vox, whose entire spiel is to use his relationship and friendship to the other sinners to serve as the basis for their partnership. A clear recipe for potential exploitation, as we see play out with the rest of the Vs. Now, I am not about to say that having friends is a terrible thing or that friends can support you, but what we got in the story was Vox's insistent need to be at the top of the food chain and be the only one there, as that is how he can secure his place without that insistent voice at the back of his mind pointing out that there is someone else who is better or stronger or better acknowledged than he is. And so that already spells a recipe for disaster, because the partnership is already primed for Vox at some point to screw over those who have worked to give him said power. This, as I'm certain we can agree, is quite different from Alastor and how he consolidates his power, and is probably why Alastor laughed in Vox's face at the thought of Vox, no matter how wide-eyed it appeared in that scene, wanting them to be partners. They, and by they I mean Vox and Alastor of course, are both manipulators, capable of working the room to get what they want. They were both in media after all, and fairly successful at what they did whilst on Earth. And so a call for partnership without defining clearly what they would each bring to the table and what they would each get out of it, coming from someone like Vox, who it is quite clear at this point, Alastor is very much aware of the type of person he is. A stereotypical white man who has always had power in his grasp by virtue of the type of society in which they lived, and who still envies those who have more than himself, is an offer that Alastor knows from jump would be a very bad deal for him. He spent most of his life navigating rooms and spaces with white men like Vox with a desire to exploit a mixed race man like himself, and so of course he's not going to fall for that ploy. Remember, both are master manipulators, except one of them has had to be manipulated for sheer survival, Alastor, and the other has had to be manipulated for dominance, Vox. And Vox's brand of manipulation is one that Alastor recognizes and knows very well. And then there is the touching, because at the end of season 2, episode 8, Alastor is able to break out of his deal with Vox based on the technicality that is Vox's insistent need to crowd into other people's spaces and touch them. Now, my bestie and I were chatting after the episode aired, and we both agreed that yes, Alastor is a hypocrite, because just as with a lot of things, the touching is something that he does as well. But like I pointed out to her, the reason behind their touches is different. Vox has always done so as a means of exerting his power in a world that caters to men like him, rich, successful white men. Alastor, on the other hand, does so in order to control the space and interaction, which might look similar, but it is different, because once again, when we refer back to his life as a human and how he had to navigate being present in spaces where he was otherwise treated as a second-class citizen, using touch to direct and control and influence the conversations and spaces and rooms he was in was how he survived. Vox, on the other hand, via conditioning by a society that had ingrained in him the belief that the world is his to own and conquer, wields touch as his due and his right. And that is something that bleeds through in his interactions, which is something that Alastor, of course, notices and takes advantage of. It really is quite stunning, even though, like my bestie and I agreed, is a case of Alastor being a hypocrite regardless. Of course, like I stated at the start of this video, there are a ton of similarities between Alastor and Vox, and it comes as no surprise to me that some of the viewers see them in basically the same light. This video, however, merely exists to show how, while certain actions can be identical, looking beyond to see what drives them makes all the difference and can give a clearer perspective to an understanding of the character. Also, Hazbin Hotel Season 2 convinced me completely that what was driving Vox's insistence focus on Alastor was not a desire to be loved or seen, as a lot of radio static shippers like to state, but more a sheer unadulterated envy and desire for the power that Alastor has. And if he's gotten his hands on it, well, there's no telling Alastor would not have gone the way of the other mentors that came before him. Of course, this is not me saying that Radio Static fans can read that as love, as him wanting love. Ship away. I'm not about to judge you on that. But if you want to judge me or disagree or agree with any of the things I've said in this video, please share your thoughts in the comments. Like this video if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet. Share this if you want. Check out my gaming or ASMR channels if they sound like something you might be interested in. I have both of them linked in the description bar. And I will see you tomorrow with a new video. Until then, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.